Throughout the Middle Ages, knights, men-at-arms and foot soldiers wore armour to protect themselves in battle. During these centuries, armour had to constantly evolve and improve to counter the threat from better and more sophisticated weaponry. Metal armour required high levels of skill to produce, and as a result was expensive and highly prized, so that only the rich could afford to equip themselves with the best protection. So from the 11th to the 15th centuries, metal armour was the province of the knight, the nobleman, and the professional man-at-arms. For this Norman knight of the late 11th century, the arming process is not particularly difficult or time-consuming. He would begin by putting on an arming shirt, a padded garment designed to cushion some of the weight of the male armour on top and to prevent it from chafing. A padded arming cap would also be worn on the head. And once these undergarments are in position, the knight is helped into a long mail coat known as a hauberk. And the hauberk is made of many thousands of iron rings, skillfully linked together in a pattern where one ring passes through 4 others, forming a highly flexible metal cloth. The sleeves of the hauberk cover the arm down to the elbow. The hauberk was quite heavy to wear, but the padding of the arming shirt helped to make it more comfortable and bearable. To reduce the weight on the shoulders, the mail could also be bagged over a tightly fastened belt around the waist. The same belt could also be used to carry the knight's sword. Together, the hauberk and arming shirt provided good protection against cutting and slashing weapons. According to some pictorial evidence from the period, such as the Bayeux tapestry, some hauberks were fitted with a rectangular feature on the chest. It has long been a matter of debate as to what this might be, and a current theory is that it was an additional piece of mail that would be raised up and fastened to either side of the head to protect the lower face and throat. This flap would be secured in place by fastening the chin strap of the helmet underneath it. Protection for the head is provided by a helmet, which at this time was usually fitted with a nasal to give some protection to the face. The domed or pointed shape of the helmet helped to deflect blows away. The best and most expensive helmets at this time were forged out of a single piece of iron, like this example, which was a highly skillful manufacturing technique. The final piece of defensive equipment was the long, kite-shaped shield. This was made of wood, leather, and rawhide, and was designed to protect the left side and leg of the knight as he sat on his horse or fought on foot in a shield wall. Once he was suitably protected, the knight needed weapons with which to fight. His principal weapon was a lance or long spear. He would also carry a straight, double-edged, one-handed sword. They were intended primarily for delivering heavy, slashing blows, but were well balanced and had a sharp point for thrusting. Some knights also used axes or percussive weapons such as clubs and maces. By the 13th century, armour had evolved, and armourers had developed new pieces. The primary form of protection was still mail and padding, and this knight of around 1250 begins by putting on a pair of mail leggings known as chausses. The Bayeux tapestry shows that mail leggings were coming into the use at the end of the 11th century, but by the mid-12th century they were in common usage. These covered his legs from thigh to ankle, and later pairs also extended to cover the foot. Some probably had leather soles, so that separate boots were not needed. The chausses were presumably fastened to a belt around the waist and held in place by laces known as points, which passed through the mail at the ankle and the knee. Some illustrations show another type of chausse that was laced up the back from ankle to thigh. Now, once the chausses were secured, the knight would put on his gambeson. This is a thickly padded garment designed to give protection against crushing blows. It would be followed by the mail shirt. Because of the additional leg protection, the mail shirt did not need to be as long as in previous centuries, and our knight is wearing a shorter version known as a haubagin. And by now, both the gambeson and the haubagin have full-length sleeves, with the mail extending to form a mitten over the hand. The soft leather palm of the mitten is slashed, enabling the wearer to remove his hand without having to take the whole garment off. And, like the chausses, the sleeves are secured in place by points, passing through the mail at the wrist and elbow. Although mail was still the main type of armour for a knight, it was vulnerable to certain types of attack. A thrust from a lance or a sword could burst through those links, whilst heavy concussive blows from maces or axes could shatter the bones beneath. And arrows, of course, were always a major threat. Armourers looked at ways of increasing the protection of armour and how it could provide it, and one solution was to create rigid defences such as the coat of plates. This was a series of overlapping iron plates riveted to a fabric cover, in this case leather. It was put on over the head and buckled up at the back, and provided an additional layer of defence over the mail and padding. Pieces of rigid armour made out of metal or leather were also developed to cover the arms and the legs. Once the body armour was in place, the knight would put on a surcoat, displaying his heraldic coat of arms, and his sword belt would be buckled over it. The sword is still of the single-handed slashing type. It would be followed by an arming cap, and then the coif of mail. This one is equipped with a flap or ventail, which is laced at either side and drawn up to protect the neck and lower face. There were several different types of helmet to choose from. In this case, the knight is wearing a great helm, which completely covers his head. Although this offers very good protection, it leaves only narrow slits and holes to see and breathe through. Due to the added protection to the legs provided by the chausses, the shield no longer needed to be as large, and the old kite shape was discarded in favour of a smaller, lighter version known as a heater shield. From the end of the 13th century, armour evolved from being primarily mail to almost complete harnesses of plate, as armourers continued to respond to threats posed by better weaponry. This knight of the late 14th century has an armour of the latest and best kind, comprised largely of pieces of iron plate. It was still important to wear a layer of padding underneath the armour, and our knight is wearing a close-fitting arming doublet. This garment not only helps to make the rigid plate armour more comfortable to wear, but the laces also act as the attachment point for several pieces of the harness. As before, the knight begins to arm himself from the bottom up, and when complete, his armor provides several layers of defense, overlapping from the top down. Protection for the legs is provided by a number of articulated plates, comprising the cuisse for the upper leg, the pollen for the knee, and the greave for the shin. The plates are riveted together so that they form a single articulated piece. The pollen has an extension on the outside to protect the side of the knee. The leg harness is held in place by buckled leather straps around the calf, knee, and thigh, and is prevented from slipping downwards by pointing it to the underside of the arming doublet. Protection for the upper body is provided by a short-sleeved male habergeon, belted at the waist to take some of the weight off the shoulders. A rigid breastplate is fastened over the habergeon, again held in place by buckled leather straps. The V-shaped bar is a stop rib designed to deflect thrusts from skidding off the breastplate and into the wearer's throat. The arms are protected by another articulated harness of 3 main sections, comprising of a hinged lower cannon for the forearm, the cutter for the elbow, and the upper cannon for the upper arm. The arm defense is attached by points to the arming doublet underneath the male sleeves and held in place by buckled straps. Although the shoulders are protected by the sleeves of the habergeon, some knights preferred the additional protection of a pair of spolders. These are made up of a number of small iron plates which are articulated by riveting them to leather straps. The spolders are secured by points, passing through the rings of the habergeon and strapped under the arm to hold them in place. On his head, the knight wears a padded arming cap and then dons his helmet. In this case, a bassinet with attached male neck protection known as an aventail. This bassinet has a visor which can be lowered to protect the face, or raised to allow the knight to see and breathe more easily. The visor is attached to the skull of the helmet by a pair of removable pins, so that if desired, it could be taken off altogether. By this time, separate gauntlets had evolved to protect the hands. They were of hourglass form, with flared cuffs to give the wearer full movement of the wrist. The level of protection afforded by this armour against slashing, crushing and piercing blows is very good, so that the shield was becoming obsolete. Some knights preferred to rely upon their armour alone and to discard the shield altogether and use their free hand to carry larger weapons when fighting on foot, such as this hand-and-a-half sword. By the end of the 15th century, armourers had developed the harness of full plate. The principal armour-making centres in Europe were northern Italy and Germany, and regional styles began to develop. This harness is a replica of one made for Archduke Sigismund von Tyrol by the master armourer Lorenz Helmschmied of Augsburg in around 1480, and it represents the very pinnacle of the armourer's craft. The armour is beautifully decorated with pierced gilt copper edging and deep fluting on the plates. The fluted decoration also helps to add strength to the armour. The level of craftsmanship is extremely high, and only the richest of men could afford such an armour. It is an example of the Gothic style that developed in Germany at this time. The squire begins by fitting the armoured shoes or sabatons to his lord's feet. This pair can be fitted with a set of fashionably long, detachable extensions. They are made out of numerous small plates which are riveted together so that they allow the wearer's foot to bend normally and are worn over his arming shoes. Next, the greaves are placed around the lower leg. They completely enclose the shin and calf and are sculpted by the armourer so that they exactly follow the contours of the wearer's leg. They are fastened by locating protruding metal studs into holes. The cuisse and pollane are next attached to the upper leg. The cuisse are very long, covering the leg right up to the hip, and are cleverly articulated on sliding rivets in slots to allow for full movement and flexion. The cuisse is pointed to the waist of the arming doublet, and straps and buckles around the knee and thigh secure the leg harness in place. The gap left around the waist and buttocks could be filled by wearing mail trunks. Similarly, the armpits and inside of the elbow could also be protected by patches of mail sewn on to the arming doublet, but on this occasion they have been left off. The next pieces to be put on are the breast and back plates, which combine to form the cuirass. They buckle together around the shoulders and fasten at the waist with studs located into holes. The waist of the breast and back plates is high, just under the ribs of the wearer, and a close fit helps to take some of the weight off of the wearer's shoulders. The hips and buttocks are protected by the fold and culotte, made up of horizontal laminated plates called lames, which allow for the necessary articulation at the waist to enable the wearer to move easily and fully. Once the cuirass is secured in place, the arm defences are put on. These are comprised of 3 separate sections: the fully enclosing lower cannon, the upper cannon, and the large pointed cutter. They can be attached separately to the arming doublet or, as here, pointed together and put on as a single unit. The hinged lower cannon is secured by another stud and hole fastening. This method of attachment reduces the number of leather straps which could be cut by an opponent, causing parts of the armour to shift or fall away. After putting the arming cap on his lord's head, the squire next attaches the chin defence or bever. It locks onto the breastplate with a spring catch and is strapped round the back of the neck to secure it. The bever protects the chin, and this example has an upper section that covers the lower face. It can be lowered to allow the wearer to breathe and speak more easily, and is held in place when raised by a sprung stud. The shoulders are protected by articulated pauldrons. They are pointed onto the arming doublet and secured underneath the arms by buckled leather straps. The sections of the pauldrons are held together by sliding rivets and leather straps to ensure they flex properly and allow the wearer full use of his arms. The final pieces of armour to be put on are the helmet and gauntlets. The helmet is a sallet, a very common type in the late 15th century. It has a tail to protect the back of the neck and a visor to protect the face. The visor is held shut with another sprung stud to prevent it opening or shifting by accident and thus blinding the wearer. The gauntlets have a long cuff, articulated wrist and separate fingers. Finally, the squire hands his lord a weapon, in this case, a hand-and-a-half sword. It has a diamond-section blade tapering to an acute point and is optimized for thrusting. In combat, it would be aimed at weak points in an opponent's armor, such as the joints and gaps between the plates. From simple coats of mail to elaborate harnesses of plate, the wealthy fighting men of the Middle Ages sought to protect themselves with the best equipment available. Armourers always rose to the challenge of creating defence against different forms of attack, slashing, piercing and crushing, and made protection that was as practical and as comfortable as possible. But the development of effective gunpowder, more reliable firearms, and a desire for greater tactical flexibility on the battlefield throughout the 16th and 17th centuries brought this long period of evolution to an end and the demise of metal armour.